Right now we're connected to our Cisco Catalyst switch via a Telnet session. You notice I'm using PuTTY for that Telnet session. And while Telnet is great, it's not secure. If I type in a command in this switch, if I say show run to look at the running configuration, for example, that information just got sent over the network in clear text. And if somebody had a packet sniffer, they could capture the data. If I were to enter a password, if I were to change the password in this switch, somebody could see that via Telnet. So Cisco recommends that we use Secure Shell, SSH, instead of Telnet. We've got a bit of work to do, though, to get it set up. First of all, we need to configure a username, because when we log in via Secure Shell, we're not just going to give a password like we did with Telnet. We're going to give a username and a corresponding password. Now, this username and password combination, it could live on an external authentication server. We're just going to keep it simple, though. We're going to create a local username database, and we can do that with the username command. I'll say username, and I'll create a username of Cisco, and I'll say it has a password of Cisco. Not a great password for the real world, but it keeps it simple for our demonstration. Now that we've got that configured, Cisco says that we should assign this switch a domain name. Now, this does not mean that we have to go into our DNS server and actually make an entry for this switch. We just need to say that there's a domain name associated with this switch. And we can say IP domain hyphen name, and we could just use something like cisco.com or maybe yourcompany.com. But let's enter some domain name for use in the switch's construction of a digital certificate. You see, the switch needs to create its own and sign its own digital certificate. A digital certificate is what you use when you purchase something on the internet. You go to a website, enter your credit card information. Hopefully that website is using HTTPS, the secure version of HTTP. And that site is going to send you their digital certificate. And inside of that digital certificate, there is a public key. And when you encrypt your credit card information with their public key, the only key that can decrypt that encryption is the corresponding private key. And that server you're communicating with, they never give out their private key. And therefore, if it is intercepted by someone, they're not going to be able to decrypt what you just encrypted. It can only be decrypted by the intended recipient. We need such a digital certificate for our switch. Now, this digital certificate does not have to be purchased. We can have what is referred to as a self-signed certificate. We can say it's okay to just sign the certificate yourself. Here's how we create that certificate. We say crypto key generate RSA. And we're asked, how many bits do we want the modulus to be? The more bits, the more secure. 512 is going to be fine for our purposes. And now we can set the SSH version. I'm going to say IP SSH version 2 as opposed to version 1. Now let's go into our line configuration mode for our VTY lines. That's how we're going to be connecting via SSH. Let's say line VTY, and I'll give the range of VTY lines. It was 0 through 15. And we've already seen that the input transport is set for SSH. If it were not, we could say transport input, and context-sensitive help shows that we could say just SSH to only support SSH. Right now it's set to all. That's the default, meaning that we can communicate via Telnet or Secure Shell. I'll just leave it at the default. But something we do need to do here, we need to tell the VTY lines where to find the user database. We're going to be giving a username and a password combination. Where does that user database live? Well, in our case, it lives locally. So we're going to say login local. I think we're done with our configuration. So let's open up another terminal window and connect via SSH. I'm using PuTTY right now, and I could certainly use PuTTY to connect via SSH. But since we mentioned TerraTerm earlier, let's see how to connect via TerraTerm. Let's go under File, New Connection. I'm going to use SSH version 2. By the way, that's using TCP port 22. There's the IP address of my switch, the management IP address. We say OK, and it says, what is the username and passphrase? Meaning that it's asking for the username and password. We'll say Cisco, click OK, and we get our switch prompt. We are now connected via Secure Shell.